My family didn't just miss a milestone, they abandoned the one moment I thought would finally stitch us back together. Not a graduation, not a job offer, but my engagement ceremony. The night I dreamed of since I was too young to understand what commitment even meant. For seats at the front, marked with their names in curling gold script, sat untouched as if the room were holding its breath, waiting for them to slip in late with excuses ready. But the excuses never came. My phone stayed quiet, screen blank, despite the way I kept flicking my eyes toward it between greetings from guests. Every vibration I imagined ended in the same truth: silence. A week later, when my tech startup's acquisition crossed national headlines, my phone suddenly lit up at the name I had been hoping to see that night. Mom, dinner at 7. Need to talk. No congratulations, no warmth, just a timestamp and a command, like she was summoning an employee who had stepped out of line. That was when something cold and steady settled inside me. A realization I should have reached years earlier. They didn't want to celebrate with me. They wanted access to whatever they feared they were losing. And the cruelest part, a small, naive shard of me had still hoped they cared. That maybe the empty chairs meant something other than indifference. I used to cling to the belief that effort could earn affection, that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed patient enough, if I made myself small enough, then family would eventually feel like home. Growing up in a cramped apartment above my father's pawn shop in Milwaukee, I convinced myself the peeling wallpaper and rattling radiators were signs of grit, of character, of a family determined to rise together. But inside those walls lived rules no one questioned. My father, Leonard, worshipped the idea of empire, not one built on love or memories, but on inventory lists, loan slips, and the illusion of authority. My mother, Marlene, never raised her voice, but wielded disappointment like a blade. My older sister, Tessa, adopted his judgment like a second religion, while my younger brother, Evan, drifted from hobby to hobby, fully confident that someone, usually me, would clean up whatever disaster followed. I learned early that my success threatened them, that my ambition somehow made me ungrateful. So I muted myself, wore plain clothes, spoke softly, hid every victory like it was contraband. I didn't realize, not then, that I was slowly erasing the person I was becoming just to keep their insecurities calm. I didn't understand that love shouldn't require shrinking. But when that message pinged after their very public absence, something clicked. And for the first time, I prepared to walk into a conversation not hoping for acceptance, just clarity. ***, what my family never saw, never bothered to ask about, were the years I spent building a life from scratch. The ones that came long before any article or investor call. They never saw the months I bounced between sublets because landlords refused to rent to someone who paid in grand stipends. They never saw me hunched over a borrowed laptop in an all-night diner, sketching wireframes on napkins because notebooks felt too expensive to waste. They didn't know about the rejections that chipped at my hope, or the nights I cried in the stairwell of my first shared office, because the prototype kept crashing and I couldn't afford a developer yet. When my father dismissed my work as digital nonsense, I swallowed the hurt and kept going. When my mother asked why I couldn't get a steady job like normal people, I bit my tongue until I tasted metal. But the moment everything inside me shifted wasn't tied to a business milestone. It was that engagement night, when I realized they saw my joy as optional, something to attend only if it benefited them. I told myself to stay composed, to chalk it up to busy schedules or bad timing. But the truth buzzed at the back of my mind like a neon sign. They just didn't think I mattered enough. Still, hope is a stubborn thing. A part of me kept wishing for a gesture, a message, a sliver of softness. So when Mom texted after the acquisition news broke, I stared at the screen longer than I should have, wondering if this was reconciliation or another transaction disguised as concern. That morning, before the headlines hit, I had been in the new downtown office, so wide, sunlit floor with glass walls and plants my assistant insisted I'd eventually remember to water. I was reviewing plans with my operations manager, Sierra, when she rushed in holding her tablet like it was a trophy. "Lena, you need to see this," she said, breathless. Articles, notifications, screenshots, they filled the screen in endless waves. Local founders sell startup for record price. I should have felt triumphant. But instead I felt hollow, like my body couldn't decide whether to celebrate or grieve. My team cheered. Sierra popped open a tiny bottle of champagne she'd hidden for months, and I forced myself to smile. Pride and sadness tangled together, two emotions pretending not to notice each other. My phone buzzed nonstop, old professors, college friends, even an ex-coworker who once told me I lacked leadership skills. Everyone seemed to appear except the people who had once claimed me as theirs. By late afternoon, the office emptied out, leaving only the soft hum of the building and my reflection in the glass. Someone who had climbed farther than she ever expected, yet still ached for a simple acknowledgement. Then my phone lit up with Mom's name. No apology. No mention of missing the engagement. Just dinner. 7 p.m. need to talk. Not a request. A summons. And that was when the hollowness settled into resolve. I would go, but not as the daughter they expected. As the woman they never thought I'd become. The messages kept piling in former mentors. Old classmates from my coding bootcamp. Even a recruiter who once told me I wasn't senior enough to think big. Everyone suddenly had something to say. Everyone except my family. I told myself their silence shouldn't matter. That I was too old to crave validation from people who'd never offered it freely. But some part of me, deep and stubborn, still reached for the thing it had always wanted, a simple "I'm proud of you." Not with strings attached. Not as leverage. Just honest pride. By early evening, the celebratory energy in the office dissolved as people trickled out, leaving behind half-empty coffee cups and a faint citrus smell from the cleaning crew. I stayed longer than I meant to, letting the city lights flicker on one by one outside the window. It felt like watching the world inhale. Then my phone buzzed again. My mother's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, my heartbeat actually stuttered, as if my body hoped before my brain could stop it. But the message wasn't what I had fantasized about during all those years of grinding alone. No warmth, no curiosity, no acknowledgement that she'd missed one of the biggest nights of my life. Just another directive. Be there at 7. I reread it, searching for something human. Nothing. Sierra was slipping her laptop into her bag when she caught the look on my face. "Let me guess," she said quietly, "your family remembered your number." I handed her my phone, and she sighed the way someone sighs when they see a friend repeating a cycle. "They deserve to escape. They want something," she murmured. "People don't schedule urgent conversations out of affection." Her words didn't sting, they clarified. I typed back, "I'll come." And as I hit send, a different feeling settled in me. It wasn't dread. It wasn't hope. It was a strange, steady calm I'd never felt before around them. Like I'd finally realized I didn't need to show up with explanations or apologies. Tucked in my pocket, I pulled into my driveway later that night, the electric gate humming behind me. The garage lights flicked on, illuminating shelves packed tight with relics from the early days, discarded prototypes, failed pitch decks, notebooks filled with frantic calculations. I touched one of the binders labeled beta phase funding and felt a wave of something close to awe. I had survived every no, every slammed door, every night I fell asleep on an office floor with a hoodie for a pillow. If I could withstand all of that, I could certainly walk into a dinner designed to corner me. I set the binder down, exhaled, and thought aloud. Why now? I didn't have to wait long for the answer, ***. Just as I locked the garage door behind me, my phone rang. Sierra's name lit up the screen, and the tension in her voice told me she wasn't calling to celebrate. "Lena, I checked into that thing you mentioned about your parents' storefronts." A quiet dread crawled up my spine. "What about them?" "They're hemorrhaging money," she said. "Months of missed payments, suppliers refusing shipments, and one of the lenders is preparing to seize assets if they don't catch up soon." I leaned against the kitchen counter, pulse flattening into something cold and focused. It wasn't surprise I felt, but confirmation. The timing of their sudden interest in me wasn't unfortunate, it was calculated. "They don't want to reconnect," Sierra continued softly. "They want a way out." The anger that followed wasn't the explosive kind I used to swallow as a teenager. This anger arrived like a deep tide, steady and sure, clearing my thoughts instead of clouding them. Sierra hesitated before asking, "What do you want to do?" I stared at the kitchen window, watching the reflection of my own face settle into resolve. "I think we act before anyone else does." There was a beat of silence before she understood. "You want control of the debt." "No," I said. "I want control of the narrative." The next morning, Sierra arrived early with coffee and a stack of spreadsheets already annotated. We combed through every invoice, contract, and loan attached to my parents' business holdings. Some lines showed mild missteps. Others were pure negligence, months of ignoring reality while hoping someone else would foot the bill. By noon, one picture was clear. Their so-called legacy wasn't just cracking. It had already collapsed under its own weight. Sierra initiated contact with the lender, who practically tripped over himself offering reduced terms just to offload the delinquent accounts. By mid-afternoon, the acquisition process had begun, a clean, silent transfer of every debt obligation into a holding company under my control. That evening, while getting ready for the dinner, something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't name at first. I didn't reach for the muted sweaters and soft colors I used around my family. Instead, I chose a fitted charcoal coat, hair pulled into a low knot, subtle makeup that didn't hide my confidence. Sierra reviewed the folder she'd assembled, documents outlining restructuring options, repayment timelines, exit strategies. "Are we crossing a line?" I asked. She shook her head. "You're not tearing anything down," she said gently. "You're protecting what you built." As I stepped out into the evening air, I felt a clarity I had never known around my family. For once, I wasn't coming to plead or perform. I was coming as a woman they had underestimated for far too long. The restaurant they chose sat on the edge of the lake. The kind of place with valet parking and oversized chandeliers meant to make guests forget how drafty the building really was. I pulled into the circular driveway just as the sun slid behind the water, casting a glassy sheen across everything. For a moment, I stayed inside my car, breathing slowly, grounding myself in the soft hum of the engine and the faint scent of lavender from the small sachet Sierra insisted I keep in the console. I wasn't here to be intimidated. Not anymore. Inside, the hostess greeted me with professional warmth, but it dissolved the instant I mentioned my parents' last name. Her posture stiffened, and she nodded toward the back hallway as if guiding me into an ambush. Of course, I thought. My father hated any form of public vulnerability. Privacy was his armor. As I stepped into the private dining room, 5 faces turned toward me with calculated expressions. My father, Leonard, sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, his expression somewhere between ownership and impatience. My mother, Marlene, offered a smile that looked rehearsed, trembling at the corners like she practiced it in the mirror. My sister, Tessa, eyed me with that familiar mix of disdain and envy, as if my mere presence disrupted her ranking within the family. Evan, my younger brother, slouched in his seat, swirling ice cubes in his drink like he was bored with the entire concept of consequences. And then there was Uncle Gary, who showed up only when financial drama stirred the air, hands clasped, posture stiff, waiting for his cue to advise. My father didn't bother with small talk. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly but not like a father addressing his daughter, either more like a supervisor calling in a subordinate. I didn't move at first. "Interesting," I said lightly. "That's exactly what I thought walking in," my mother huffed, clutching the napkin like it was part of her performance. "Lena, please don't start with that tone. We're just trying to have a meal as a family." I finally took my seat, smoothing my coat, letting the silence press around us. Then came the reveal. My father cleared his throat, a sound I knew too well, one that always prefaced a demand disguised as a duty. "We're dealing with a setback," he began. "The store's hit a rough patch. Nothing catastrophic, but we need an infusion of capital to stabilize things." Tessa nodded as if she'd rehearsed the line. "Your company sold for plenty. You can help. It's what families do." My mother dabbed the corner of her eyes. "We didn't want to burden you, sweetheart, but we're out of options." We were surprised to hear the acquisition from strangers. "Why didn't you tell us?" I let that question settle like dust in the air. Why didn't I tell them? Maybe because they didn't ask. Maybe because they'd skipped the moment they were meant to witness. Evan finally chimed in, rolling his eyes. "Just forget all the drama, okay? We're here now. Let's figure out a solution." I reached for my leather bag. Their heads snapped toward the movement like animals waiting for a handout. They thought they knew what was coming: a check, a promise, a rescue. Instead, I placed a thick folder Sierra had prepared onto the center of the table and slid it toward my father. ******. My father stared at the folder as if it were written in a language he didn't recognize. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "Perspective," I said, pushing it closer. "And clarity." He flipped it open, and his expression drained of its practiced confidence. Tessa leaned forward sharply, scanning the documents. Evan froze mid-sip. My mother covered her mouth with her hand as if the words on the page physically struck her. "I don't understand," my father said, voice gruff. "These accounts, they're ours." "Not anymore," I said, my voice even and calm. "Every loan tied to the business is now under a holding company I control." Tessa's jaw dropped. "You bought the debt?" "Acquired the responsibility," I corrected. "Legally, quietly, efficiently." Uncle Gary muttered a curse under his breath, flipping pages as if searching for loopholes. My father slammed the folder shut. "Who do you think you are? You had no right." "The lenders gave me every right," I said, cutting clean through his outrage. "They were relieved to offload an account they were ready to condemn." My mother looked at me through watery eyes. "Lena, how could you do something like this?" "How could I not?" I asked softly. "I wasn't going to let your collapsing finances drag me into ruin. Not after everything I built." My father rose halfway from his seat, his voice cracking with something between fury and fear. "If you walk out of this room without helping us, you will not be welcome in this family again." The ultimatum hit the air hard, but for the first time in my life, it didn't land anywhere inside me. I stood up slowly, feeling every year of disappointment settle into something firm. "I didn't leave this family," I said. "You left me behind years ago." I just finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a smaller envelope, placing it beside the folder. "This is a buyout offer," I said. "$200,000. enough to wipe your remaining obligations clean and give you 30 days to vacate the properties. After that, I overhaul the entire operation. Tessa snatched the envelope, ripping it open. You're throwing us out of our own livelihood, she hissed. No, I said, the debt already did that. I'm just making it official. Evan shook his head, muttering something about betrayal. Uncle Gary whispered, you're destroying your father's legacy. I met his eyes. I'm ending the damage it caused. My mother began sobbing quietly, reaching for my hand. But I stepped back. You didn't come tonight to reconnect, I said. You came for money. The room felt impossibly small, closing in around their disbelief. For the first time, the silence belonged to me, ***. The words hung between us, not sharp or shouted, but spoken with the kind of certainty that comes only after years of swallowing pain, until it hardens into truth. My mother's crying grew louder, but her tears felt strangely distant, like background noise in a room I no longer lived in. My father's face shifted anger first, then disbelief, and finally something I had never seen on him before, fear. Lena, don't do this, he said, and the crack in his voice startled everyone, including him. I looked at him, really looked, and realized I wasn't staring at the imposing man who once dictated the rhythm of our entire household. I was looking at someone who had built his identity on control. Someone terrified of losing the last piece of leverage he thought he had over me. I already did, I told him, my voice steady. I reached for my bag as the door opened behind me. Sierra stepped in, her presence calm but commanding, holding a second set of documents tucked under her arm. The room seemed to flinch at the sight of her, maybe because she represented the version of me they never believed existed. If you need clarification on anything, she said, directing her gaze to the table, our office will respond to all written inquiries. My father sank back into his chair as if the weight of every consequence he'd avoided finally landed. Tessa muttered curses under her breath, flipping through pages as though searching for a loophole that wouldn't appear. Evan stared at the table like it had betrayed him. My mother reached out again, palm trembling, but I stepped just out of reach. Please, she whispered, don't leave like this. I held her gaze. I begged you to be there once, I said, thinking of the empty chairs at my engagement ceremony. And all of you stayed away. The truth of it settled heavily across the table. But I didn't linger to watch them squirm beneath it. I turned, walked out of the room, and let their voices raised, frantic, desperate, fade behind me like echoes in a hallway I no longer needed to revisit. When I stepped outside, the night air felt crisp and shockingly clean, almost like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. My phone buzzed. A message from Sierra, proud of you. For the first time in as long as I could remember. I didn't question whether someone meant those words. I didn't feel guilt for wanting to hear them. I just let them land. When I got home later that night, I dropped the folder onto the kitchen island. Instead of dread, I felt something close to relief wash over me. Not victory, just release. The kind that makes you realize you've been gripping pain so tightly your hands forgot how to open. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city fill the space where my family's voices had once lived rent-free in my mind. And for the first time, the silence felt like mine, ***, in the days that followed. My life shifted in ways that felt both subtle and seismic. Contractors arrived to walk through the shuttered storefronts my parents once insisted were their legacy. Designers trailed behind them carrying tablets, mapping out what the spaces could become: community co-working hubs, artisan marketplaces, even a small incubator for young entrepreneurs who reminded me of who I used to be. Each visit felt like peeling back layers of old expectations, letting the buildings breathe for the first time in years. They weren't monuments to failure anymore. They were blank canvases waiting for purpose. My family didn't call. Not once. But news traveled anyway. Tessa vented to distant cousins about my betrayal. My father insisted to neighbors that he was simply taking a break to reconsider business strategy. My mother told one of her church friends that I had been led astray by ambition, and Evan predictably posted cryptic quotes online about false loyalty and people forgetting where they came from, though he never mentioned my name. For the first time, none of their reactions triggered the old ache in my chest. They existed, yes, but they didn't define me anymore. One afternoon, while reviewing final renovation proposals, I caught my reflection in the window, hair pulled back, blazer sharp, expression steady. I saw a woman who had stopped apologizing for taking up space. A woman who no longer dimmed herself to fit into a narrative someone else wrote for her. And that realization hit me with unexpected gentleness. I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stepped out of a story that never made room for me to grow. The reborn spaces would open in the fall, a line of revitalized community hubs built on transparency and purpose rather than guilt and obligation. As I stood in one of the newly painted rooms, sunlight streaming through wide windows, I understood something I had spent years trying to outrun. Leaving wasn't abandonment, it was protection. Protection for my future, for my peace, for the version of myself I'd spent so long burying under expectations that were never mine to carry. In the end, it wasn't the multi-million-dollar acquisition that changed my life. It was the moment I finally accepted that I didn't need a family who only reached for me when they were drowning. Real love doesn't vanish when you shine. Real loyalty doesn't require silence. Walking out of that restaurant, I didn't lose a family. I reclaimed myself. And if you've ever had to let go of people who call their control care, then you already know exactly how liberating that first step can be.